Hello, human beings! Today we are going to look at how to practice. We're going to split this in 3 parts. The first part is going to be setting really clear targets and goals, because theoretically that should affect, shape, and direct your entire practice and how you practice. Then the second part is going to be how you give yourself feedback and how you reflect on that practice and change that practice. And then the third part is going to be resting. The first thing is setting clear targets. We want to ask why you're practicing. Because if you're practicing to get better, that is way too vague. First thing is figure out, are we practicing in order to learn a new skill? Keep practicing and develop a skill that's old or that we already know? Are you practicing for a performance? Are you practicing for a recording or something else? That's like your big goal. So why you're practicing is your big goal. And then within your big goal, you can have smaller goals and like mini goals and targets and small things that you can reach. Let's say that your broad goal, hypothetically, is developing a new skill. If you want to develop a new skill, you want to practice very, very little. Very small periods of time. So you want like a minute, 30 seconds, maximum 5 minutes. Your brain is trying to learn something new, which means everything is going to work against you. The whole system is going to try and do habitual patterns. It's going to try and go towards the familiar. It's not going to try and go in weird directions. We want to get that skill really solid. The way that we get that skill really solid is you practice it, then you leave a long gap. That could be 2 hours if you like being a manic practicer. Ideally, I would say 24 hours at least. And then you practice that skill again. The longer gap you leave, the more you're working with your retrieval. You're trying to retrieve the skill and the memory. So you're not working on your short-term memory. We want to make sure when you're learning a new skill, you're not working short-term memory. So don't do like a 1 hour, 2 hour practice session. It's a waste of time. You want to forget how you did it and then try and find it again. It may feel like the process is slower, but it's more solid. And this is the way that you can prevent like all those things that you see people asking about, where they're like, oh, I went away for a month, or I didn't do this for 2 weeks, and now I can't remember how to do it. It's like, well, you haven't practiced enough retrieval. Let's say you get that new skill down. 24 hours pass. You do it again. It's perfect. Great! Do that like 2 or 3 times. Make sure that it wasn't just luck. And once you know that you can do that skill within 24 hours, leave 48 hours. Can you do 48 hours gap? Great! 72 hours. Great! What we want to build up to is we want to build up to you do it on Monday, and then you don't do it again, and the next time you do it is Monday. Like that. So, a week of forgetting. You shouldn't forget it if the skill is solid. So that's for practicing a new skill. If you're practicing an old skill, this is where you can start doing longer practice sessions, but you also want to be challenging the skill. So pick a specific target before you sing a song or whatever, and do like, I'm going to vary the volume constantly throughout the song. Or I'm going to sing this song and I'm going to make sure that the beginning of the phrase is always louder, and then I decrease and decrescendo. Pick small goals and small targets that are challenging that skill. And it doesn't need to be realistic, right? You may never use this skill. As in, you may never want to crescendo, decrescendo during a phrase. Or you might desperately want to. It doesn't matter. What matters is you're trying to do a different coordination. A little bit of a challenge on what you already know. You might also want to just go through the motions of the skill you already know, taking moments to pause and figure out, how did you feel? Did you feel confident? Were you not sure what was going to come out of your mouth? And then, like, you sang and it was exactly what you wanted, but you might want to work on your psychology behind the skill. You might want to work on how you feel, feeling more comfortable, feeling more confident. Build up an appropriate mindset. Very often the body is like 3 steps ahead of the brain. Very often we can do things, but our brain is still convinced that we don't know how to do it. Address that in your long practice sessions. Just take the time and address it. You might also want to challenge the stamina of it. Different skills will have different stamina. When you get tired, stop. Make a note of when you got tired. Repeat that duration until you can go further. Like, just build up that stamina of that skill. If there's one piece of general advice I would give, it is, if you don't have clear targets, maybe don't practice. Use that practice time in order to sit down and really evaluate and figure out, what are the targets? Because otherwise, whoa, what are we doing? If you're building up towards a performance, let's say you've got a gig coming up, or whatever, you practice completely differently. So you give yourself a tiny warm-up. You can vary it each day until you find something that really works for you, and then you use that. Let's say 3 to 5 minutes is your warm-up, and then you go straight in to the set. Hopefully you have your set list, you know the sequence of the songs, and you practice them in sequence. Build it up, first of all. Build up the stamina. Don't practice the whole set list. Don't do that. Especially not if your performance is like in a week or in 2 weeks. Don't make yourself tired before that. Do like 3 songs the first day. Then do the next 3 songs the next day until you get through your set list. And then the next time around, do 5 songs in one go. Then the next 5 songs until you've completed the set list. And then the next time, try the whole set list. Like, build it up bit by bit. Don't just jump straight into the deep end. Visualize the performance so you can legitimately sit out on certain songs and just imagine yourself playing it live and doing it live. Imagine what you want from the audience, what kind of interaction, what kind of relationship. What do you want to be doing? How do you want to be moving on stage? Think about all those things. Especially be very interested in sections of your set list where you feel uncomfortable and you don't know what to do with yourself physically. As a singer, there's a lot of downtime. There are guitar solos, there are introductions, there are gaps. Hopefully. Depends on what genre you're doing, but there are probably going to be bigger gaps than there are for other instruments. And at the end of the day, you are a sack of potatoes in front of people. You need to do something. So figure it out. If you're always playing the same set list, and things are kind of identical, you can start playing around with details. So try different intensities. Start really intense. Make it softer. Build up the intensity towards the end. Start really softly and just consistently ramp up the intensity of the entire set list. Like, play the long game. Look at the whole arc of the whole set and practice that. You can also, as weird as it may sound, play around with the speed of the songs. You can practice the songs faster, slower, and you can discover really interesting things by doing this. The majority of your practice should still be the set in the correct speed, but every now and then, just to kind of trip you up, just to add something different, do one of the songs double speed. Like, just throw something weird in there to keep your brain alive and alert. And then the last thing, if you're getting ready for a performance and you're practicing alone or whatever, is find like soft toys, plushies, action figures, whatever you have lying around, anything that has eyeballs, and put it in front of you and make them look at you, facing you, like staring you down. It makes a difference. And if you don't have any of that kind of stuff, pull up an image on your phone or on your computer screen of human beings, like an audience, looking at you, and practice like that. And practice everything, like practice making contact or not making contact, like looking over their heads, looking in the distance, looking right into their eyes, depending on what you want. It's a very, very, very different experience if you're like screaming out Walk by Pantera and you're staring someone down in the eyes versus you're singing the local pop song and staring them down. Very different results and experiences for the audience. Think about the audience. You've been an audience member. You know what the vibe is. What would you like? Kind of let that guide you. And then the last thing is, if you're building up for a recording, perform the song, like check in with the song, then jump around in the song. So sing the whole song once so that you keep remembering, again, the overall arc and the overall vibe of the song. And then jump into verse, second verse, third verse, chorus, bridge, like mix it around, do whatever it is that you're doing, jump around as sections, because you might jump around a lot when you're recording, or you might record in a straight line. It depends on what you prefer, but find out what you prefer. Take breaks within your practice session, take breaks, and then jump right back into it. So do that, like that whole weird studio vibe, where you're sitting around like a weirdo and people are picking tracks and stuff like that and you're not doing anything, and then suddenly they're like, okay, record, boom. You're like, ah! Practice that. Record everything. Make sure you are recording if you're practicing for a recording, so that whenever anyone presses record, you think nothing of it. You want to be numb to it. You want the recording to be a normal part of the process. And of course, bring in your plushies, bring in images of humans, maybe perform in front of people. If you have friends and family that are willing, that's always awesome. Because remember, unless you're like a YouTuber in your bedroom recording by yourself, you're probably going to have an engineer there. So there's going to be another human being. And it very often can feel way more intense and intimate than a normal performance. So it can be even more stressful. So practice the stress part as well. That. The second part is how to give yourself feedback. So feedback is important. It's also very, very complex. Feedback is the main reason why people have singing lessons. And this is for a lot of reasons. It's also so that you have a human being looking at you and you have to perform. And anyway, there are a lot of reasons to have lessons, whether in person or online, same thing. But for feedback, 2 strategies for you. The first strategy is record yourself. To begin with, if you're not used to recording yourself, you record yourself for about a minute or 5 minutes, whatever, pick a duration, and then you delete the file. You don't listen to it. You're just getting used to the process of recording. Start like that. When you're very comfortable and you are seeing that it isn't affecting you and you're not singing differently and doing weird stuff when you record yourself, then you can start listening back to your recordings. When you listen to your recordings, don't just listen to it aimlessly. Pick one thing. Pick one parameter that you will focus on. Pick, like, how clearly am I saying the words? Can you understand anything I'm saying? Is there vibrato when I wanted vibrato? Am I getting emotion across? Whatever. Pick tiny, tiny details and listen to it. Just thinking about that one parameter only. If there are multiple parameters you want to assess, you listen to the same recording multiple times. If you've recorded yourself, and if you listen to singers very critically to a ridiculous degree, and you make a note of your impressions, and you do this systematically, and you do this for a prolonged period of time, you will know that if, let's say, you're listening to the emotion and you're trying to identify how is a singer adding emotion, you'll listen to the verse, you'll make some notes. The second time you listen to the verse, thinking of the same thing, you'll make notes. They'll be completely different. And the same will happen the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time. Every single time we hear something different, and very often we hear things that contradict what we heard the previous time. This is not to say that we can't hear. It just means that listening to things and identifying parameters is extremely complex and variable. It's not this awesome, well, I have a recording and now it's objective. It's like, it won't be. It won't be. As long as you are listening to your recording, your subjective experience will color it. So just be aware of that. Either way, that's the first thing. So record yourself. And then the second thing is write down your feedback. Write down 3 things. Write down one thing that went well whilst you were doing whatever it is that you did. One thing that improved, what got better, and one thing that you would like to improve. This is so that you learn to give yourself feedback that is a little bit more balanced. It's looking at what went well and what we would like to improve, rather than just constantly bashing yourself. Because bashing yourself is not constructive criticism. It's not as useful. Like, we really, really, really need to get less noise in your brain. So those 3 things. Something that went well, something that improved since the last time you did it. It can even be in the same day, etc. And something you would like to improve. And then the thing that you would like to improve can be your target for the next day's practice session. So yeah, feedback. Make sure you're giving yourself kind feedback. And if you're not giving yourself kind feedback, like if you're really bashing yourself, make that the focus of your practice session. Practice not bashing yourself. Just sing the same thing on a loop and just let it be. That's very important. It's as important as your singing skills. Your mental state is as important as your singing skills. And then the third parameter of this whole thing is resting and processing. Obviously, sleep. Sleeping is important. Leave gaps. But the general thing that I would say is, if you're doing long practice sessions, 1 to 2 hours is great. 3 hours is a thing. 4 hours is about the maximum I would do with voice. Voice is not like other instruments. You don't get to sit at a piano and play for 8 hours the way that classical musicians do. You don't get to play a violin for 8 hours. If you try to sing for 8 hours, it's a recipe for disaster. I would avoid it if you can avoid it. There are ways that you can build up to this, and there are ways that you can survive that, but what's the point? 4 hours max for voice. I wouldn't do more. I like rest days. I would really urge you to have rest days within your practice schedule. So what I usually tell people is try and practice for 4 to 5 days in a week, and 2 or 3 days of rest. Complete rest. Like, don't sing. You can talk, you can phonate, but don't sing, or at least don't sing for extensive periods of time. You need to rest. Your brain needs to synthesize all the information, and it needs time off. Your body needs time off. Everything needs time off. But the main thing is the discipline of not practicing. If you don't have a practice routine, and you haven't built up a practice routine, and you haven't practiced things excessively for very long periods of your life, you might not understand what I mean when I talk about the discipline of not practicing. But if you have been subjected to any Western form of musical training where they constantly tell you, like, practice every day, and they push that a lot, and you have a practice routine, and you're used to practicing, and your brain is almost like default practicing, so it's going into that habitual space, meaning it's going on autopilot, which again is not really what we want for practicing, unless you want to practice being on autopilot, in which case, great. But in general, not practicing takes as much discipline as practicing. And when you are going on tour and you're singing non-stop and people want to socialize and all that kind of stuff, or if you injure yourself and you need to not phonate or not sing or not talk as much, if you had incorporated rest days into your normal routine, when you're on tour, or if you injure yourself, you'll remember that. You'll thank me for it, for the discipline of not practicing. So please incorporate rest days, and please make sure that you have the discipline not to practice when you don't want to practice. It's easier said than done. That would be like my really basic advice on how to practice and my outline of how to practice. Set your targets, set clear targets. If you don't know what your target is, use your practice time to set that target. Like, don't practice for that day. Just figure out what the target might be, and then do it the next day. So set your targets, have clear goals, give yourself feedback in a useful way, in a way that you can then incorporate that feedback into tomorrow's practice session. It's not just about being like, oh, this was good, this was bad. Never. If you're giving yourself binary feedback, or if anyone gives you binary feedback down the lines of good or bad, that's not very useful. Like, you can feel happy about it, or you can feel sad about it, but it doesn't affect tomorrow's practice session. So, not very constructive. Meh, that. And incorporate rest days, and be diligent about it. It's a very useful skill in life. I'm super happy to go into any level of depth on any of these points or more points around practicing. Let me know what kind of things you struggle with around practicing, and who knows, if it's very simple, I will answer your comment with advice, but if it's something quite intricate and fun, might make another video. So yeah, just let me know about your practicing life. And that is all for now. Yay! Bye-bye!